Hi, Lane. Hi, Lisa.
Morning
Morning.
Hi there.
or good afternoon and good evening.
Yeah, nice sunny day here.
It's still cold here,
Oh,
cold and gray.
I just found it a bit weird how it's saying I'm not the host, and I don't see Lisa as the host as well. So I don't know who switched to be the host of this meeting, but it's being recorded anyway. So
Yeah, that's unusual. Usually there's at least one host.
yeah,
I've never seen that before.
I remember being the host,
Um,
and making you the co-host. So this is a bit weird.
as long as it's working, and it seems.
Yeah, but I'll have to check, right? I thought it was something with my Zoom login. I signed out and logged back again. Let's see. I think it's fine as long as it's working.
Yeah, it says it's recording and people are joining, so should be fine. But yeah, that is strange.
Yeah.
Well, we have Ashley, which is important.
Yeah. Hi, Ashley.
Hello, how's everyone doing?
We're good.
Yeah.
Good.
How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty well. I'm pretty tired, but I'm good.
Oh no.
Morrow, how are you?
Hi,
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I'm great.
Yes. Nice to see you.
Hope the same over there.
So guys, I'm just going to wait a couple of minutes we've got a lot of people connecting. So we'll just give it another minute. All right, guys, out of respect for everybody's time, we'll go ahead and get started. Next slide, please. Antitrust statement. Textile Exchange convenes the textile community and values diversity of views, expertise, opinions, backgrounds, and experiences. It's expected that members of this community will collaborate by sharing ideas, information, and resources of publicly available information only, and avoid discussions on price, strategic plans, or other private and sensitive information. Also, just a call out to the group, we are recording these sessions starting now and will continue through. We did a poll in February that showed that basically 96% of the group was okay with recording. So we're really recording so that we can post it on the hub, and people who weren't able to join the meeting can still listen to it later. Next slide. So the agenda today, we're going to, Ashley Gill is with us from Textile Exchange, and she will give us some updates on the GRS and what's going on in her world. We'll touch base on the status of the RPET challenge that we discussed last month, and talk a little bit about the marketing effort behind that. And then we'll go through the terms of reference for the RPEC group and touch base on the 2021 meeting dates. Next slide. I think most of us know Ashley, but Ashley's been working with Textile Exchange on standards since 2012. She led the RCS and the GRS and the Responsible Down Standard. And she also works to align the organization strategy across all platforms of work. So Ashley, welcome and thank you for being here. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Elaine. And I see a lot of familiar faces in the group, so thanks everybody. What I'm going to do is mostly give you an update on revisions. I can also talk a little bit just about adoption and some data work that we're doing, but primarily I thought what would be relevant for this group is that we are launching the revision of the recycled claims standard and the global recycled standards. And so I wanted to make sure that everybody was aware of kind of what we're looking at, how we want to approach it, and participation. But just one update that will also be relevant, if we go to the next slide, is a revision of the content claim standard. So just in case you're not familiar, the content claim standard is the chain of custody portion from the recycled standards. And so we've been going through this revision for, I guess we launched it around this time last year, launching the initial feedback period. We took some of the feedback that we heard and went through the goals and objectives. We went through some of those specific issues that had been brought up and did a lot of the research and proposing of ideas of how we wanted to address them. And then we pulled in Q2 and Q3 of last year, we brought the international working group together and started going through meetings to make decisions. And we've just launched the draft consultation. So that consultation is out now. If you would like information about how you can participate, you can visit our website, textileexchange.org/standards. There's a development hub there that has the CCS revision page on it. You can also send an email to standards@textileexchange.org, and they'll let you know how you can be involved. But something that's of particular relevance, which I'll talk about in just a second, in more detail about how it affects the recycled standards, is that we are piloting the potential to do a mass balance calculation, not across the entire supply chain, but just at the chemical recycling stage. So this has been identified as an issue that our current transaction certificates rely on being able to segregate at a batch level, which is not something that is typically done within most continuous production or chemical production facilities, but especially this is relevant for chemical recycling. And so there's a few companies that are part of that pilot. I was on one of the shadow audits last week. And so we'll be kind of taking the learning that we use for this and pulling it in on the claims side for the recycled standard. But essentially it's just identifying whether in some instances it might be okay to calculate the input and output on a mass balance basis rather than at the batch level, which is what our standards currently require. But please do take the time to look at that update. There's also really significant updates in the requirements for brands in order to label. So we were looking at shifting away from ending the chain of custody at the seller in the last business to business transaction and shifting that to always being the brand in order for a product to qualify for labeling. So please do take a look at that draft. If you've got any questions for us, feel free to send those to standards@textileexchange. We'll also have questions at the end of this section that you can ask, but we thought it was really relevant to include an update of this, just given the fact that for the recycled standards, this is the basis of the chain of custody. This is what a lot of the facilities in those supply chains are being asked to verify. Next slide. So this slide looks really similar, but the dates have changed and the standard has changed. So we run our revisions. We're trying to be even more consistent than we have been in the past, but our revisions typically run for anywhere from about a year, 18 months. In some instances, it might be a little bit longer, but we're trying to make this a much more efficient process. But we are planning to launch the revision of the recycled standards this year. And this initial phase in this blue, I'll go into a little bit more detail on this version, but what we want to do initially is we will have a public consultation period. So what that means is that we invite people to send us their comments on the current version. Are there problems? Are there gaps? Are there areas of confusion? Anything like that that you want to send us. We obviously get feedback on our standards all the time, and that's something that we do keep a record of. But this is just a special push, making sure that people know this revision is coming. Is there anything that you want to make sure gets included within the scope? So we will take all of that feedback on, along with feedback that we have from our certification bodies, the feedback that we've collected throughout the few years since the standard was last revised. And then we'll build a revision plan. So we will include all the topics that we want to address. We will start to draft the issue papers where we kind of build out an explanation of what the issues are and some potential proposals to address the issue. We'll start convening the international working group, asking people to join if they're interested, reaching out to specific stakeholders that have participated in the past, and start pulling that group together. And this portion in green is really where we start working through the revision with the stakeholders themselves. So the international working group meetings will most likely start in Q3 of this year. And we'll have the issue papers, and we'll use that consultation to just go through the issue papers and address the topics kind of one by one. And the end of that will be a draft that will then go out for public consultation again at the end before it gets finalized. So the aim of this would be to have a draft version of the RCS and GRS by around spring or so, or early 2022. So that's the aim. And on the next slide, I've gone through and just given you kind of some specific topics that we know for sure that we want to address, just based off of feedback that we have received up to now. Probably the number one question that we get is does this specific type of material qualify for the standard? So we've built our recycled input verification requirements around ISO's definition of recycled. And in this version, we will evaluate, from all the feedback that we hear and experts, what the best approach is. But what we're looking at potentially doing is to essentially identify the specific materials that qualify, and from where those feedstocks are that qualify, just to make it a lot more clear to people which materials qualify and don't. And this is really specifically an issue when it comes to pre-consumer. And the outcome is that we have had a difficult time with consistent interpretation, because a lot of people use different terminology, recapture, reuse, things that have been captured from one processing stage and is able to be put back into the same processing stage should be considered efficiency. And so what we want to do is make it a little bit easier for the industry to identify what is efficiency in production and what is actually recycled content. And so that's going to be a really big component of the revision. The second thing within the verification of the content itself is adding feedstock specifications that could follow the material through the supply chain. So right now, the two categories that we identify are pre-consumer and post-consumer, but we potentially want to include more details on the feedstock specification, maybe mechanical versus chemical recycling, and some additional categorizations. The challenge with this is that we know the more indicators or the more identities, so to speak, of the material, the more challenging it can be to segregate it and to keep that identification all the way through the supply chain. So we don't want this to turn into just a massive laundry list of possible specifications that could be included, but really to understand what contributes most meaningfully and what information would be the most valuable for us to track. I mentioned before that we are doing this mass balance calculation pilot for the chain of custody. This will also have implications on claims because we want to make sure, I think one of the biggest considerations in accepting mass balance as a viable form of calculation is that it's a really clear claim to the end consumer. Our standards today are intended to verify a claim that it says something like, this product contains X% of this claim material. And a mass balance claim obviously creates some complication with that, because we're not actually saying that this product contains that exact percentage, but that it's been allocated that percentage, or that it, that even just that it contributes to the use of this specific material. And so based off of what we learned from the pilot, we want to also give some claims options for the mass balance if that's accepted. Currently, under the pilot, we're not allowing any consumer-facing claims with reference to our standards for any of those facilities that are participating in that pilot. But we want to talk about that within the context of the RCS and GRS revision, because that's where these claims are going to show up first, is connected with this standard. The GRS, as most of you hopefully already know, includes processing criteria as well as the recycled content verification. So it includes social and environmental facility criteria, and then also a chemical component. And currently, we are recognizing the compliance or conformity with ZDHC's manufacturing restricted substance list. But for both of these areas, we are really looking at moving to a more kind of partnership, potentially equivalency type of model. Textile Exchange, as you well know, I'm sure, are really focusing in on our climate strategy. We're focusing in on the tier 4 level, some instances, the fiber production level, where that's relevant. And so we really feel like, we don't want our standards to have a new or a different set of criteria that a facility has to then get audited to. And so what we want to do is move to a model where we potentially just recognize existing auditing. that is already happening rather than having our auditors repeat that. But that's something we'll explore within the context of the international working group. And then we are strengthening the relationship with ZDHC, and we want to also just strengthen the connection between the GRS and the ZDHC to address some of the interpretation challenges that we've had, and also just to provide more consistent guidance between the two organizations on how to make that work. So those are some of the overall topics, and I think I'll stop there to see if there are any questions. I know I covered a lot of ground there.
Questions from the group?
Elaine, I'm trying to raise my hands, but I don't see it now. Can I just raise my
You go
hand?
right ahead anyway. Just raise your hand.
Yes, please raise my hand. Ashley, thank you very much for that. Very clear, very useful information that I would love to share also with my members.
Great.
I have a question on the mass balance, which is quite a sensitive topic in some parts of the value chain. My question is, would you consider switching to entirely mass balance to have both options, or you don't know yet and this will be decided for the public consultation? That's one question. And on the processing of criteria, I think it's very, very good what you're saying. The problem of audit fatigue for the industry is very significant. So the more you can recognize valuable criteria, the better it is. From our standpoint, it's good news. ZDHC is one of those. There are many others as well. There are some others. Perhaps there's also relevant input. So again, thanks for this input.
Yeah, thanks for that, Mauro. On the question of mass balance, you know, the way that some other standards use mass balance is to apply it to the entire supply chain. So they kind of keep track of what's coming in. The best example, I think, is BCI, and I'm not going to pretend to describe their system exactly because I'll leave that up to them. But essentially what they do is they kind of track what's the number of bales that are produced, and then the amount of volume that a brand wants to allocate or wants to contribute, how many of those bales they want to contribute to. What happens in the supply chain is there's definitely system partners that are identified as being connected to that bale, but they don't necessarily keep track of the individual batches. And the limitation to that kind of whole supply chain system is that it does not support, it's not a valid method to verify a claim that this product contains this material or this percentage type content claim. And what we, you know, what Textile Exchange's model provides with this batch level, facility level segregation is the support of that type of claim, of that type of verification. And while we do think that there are instances with, especially with new standards, with new materials, with materials that maybe still have limitations to have a scaled level of volume, that kind of segregation system can add a lot of cost to the system. We're not looking at replacing our entire chain of custody with an overall supply chain mass balance model. One of the things that we are looking at is impact incentives as a way for brands to contribute to the production of volume, to contribute to that scaling up. But then for that to be a stepping stone to those product level identification type claims. This type of pilot that I'm describing with the chemical recyclers is really unique because we're only talking about changing how the volume reconciliation is done at that one facility. So the idea would still be that once it left, say, the yarn manufacturer, that yarn would still be tracked like any other claimed material, like any other CCS material. There would still be batch level segregation. There would still be transaction certificates that followed every time the goods changed ownership. And at the end, you would still have confidence that, you know, X% of that product was made from that yarn. The percentage of recycled content in that yarn may be reached through an allocation method. So it is still a more precise product claim than an overall mass balance system claim would be. So our kind of thinking is that we want to move to bridging between something like the impact incentives, where you're not requiring that product level segregation, but you're also not making a product claim, to, and then balancing that with our full product segregation system, taking into consideration specific types of allocation that might be needed at a given facility. If that makes sense, Mauro. I think I went into a lot of detail, but hopefully that answered your question. And then on the recognition side, absolutely, we're in alignment with that idea that more recognition is good. And, we're looking at potentially using some of the tools that ITC, the standards map that they've developed, where they've kind of benchmarked how these different social and environmental standards perform, and then addressing or accepting that within our tool. We obviously would want to do that in partnership with those organizations, and so we'll be looking at where we can establish those types of partnerships and get agreements in place. We don't want to do anything that's just one-sided. We really want to work on that with them, and that's where I think CDHC is kind of the shining example of that, where there is a lot of commitment on both sides to make that kind of partnership work. And so we're really excited about the role that they play in the chemical space, and for the ability for us to really point to them and the work that they have done to recognize some of the existing chemical management systems like BlueSign, Okotex, and the others. Any other questions?
Hi, Ashley, it's Alice from GAP.
Hey, Alice.
Quickly, is there a new proposal that brands would need to become certified as part of the complete chain of custody? And can you say a little bit more about what that proposal is?
Yeah, so that would be part of the content claim standard revision that is out for draft consultation. And the idea with that is that as it stands today, if you want to put a product claim that references our standards, the logo, the name, if you want to put that on a product, right now that product has to be certified all the way up to the seller in the last business-to-business transaction. And the end result of that is that essentially who has to be certified depends on the distribution model. And what we have learned, especially in the last, I think, 2 to 3 years, is that there's a lot of interest in labeling, and there are a lot of different distribution models. And so coming up with who has to be certified and linking that to the distribution model creates a lot of complexity that really isn't that needed. We really think that the brand has most of the authority and responsibility in how a given product is labeled. And so we really feel like the responsibility can end with them, and should end with them. We're also looking at how we can make the certification process for a brand more appropriate for what a brand's role actually is, so that it looks a lot less like maybe an on-site audit, going through warehouses, and maybe more on the side of looking at what their internal control systems are, and if they have a good model just within their product tracking system to identify what products are certified and which ones aren't, and being able to link to those incoming transaction certificates. And so you can read all about that proposal and that idea in the current draft that's being released in the content claim standard. And I can send that to you directly if that's helpful.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Actually, I'll just pop the link to that page into the chat box if that works for everyone. The other thing, I think if we want to go to the next slide, I think we might have one more slide. I'm not sure. Yeah, so if you want to be involved with the international working group, that's really the decision makers for our revisions. We'll be launching that an initial public feedback period. I think we're launching that April 1st. We'll run that for 2 months. The international working group will start to ask folks to sign up for that. after that period. The best way to be involved at kind of a baseline is just make sure you're getting textile exchange communications and be watching for updates and news about the recycled claims standard and the global recycled standard revision specifically. But if you already know that you definitely want to be in the IWG, you can send a note to standards@textileexchange.org and they'll get you on that right list. And I think that's all I had. The other thing I wanted to just mention, and I intended to have slides for this, and I didn't. We don't have the final numbers yet, so I wasn't able to do that. But we've really seen, specifically with the recycled standards, we have seen an enormous level of growth. I think, especially in a year like 2020, it's a level of growth that almost shocked us. And so one of the things that we want to do as part of this revision is to really understand where that growth is coming from, and if there are specific risks that we should be taking into consideration that maybe we haven't. So if we've only been receiving feedback from, this portion of companies that have been certified, and then there's this massive amount of growth, there may not be as much of a connection or much of a information feedback loop from those new entities that are being certified. And so we know a lot of that demand is being driven by more and more retailers asking brands to provide this kind of information, to provide certification. And so if you have any other kind of comments or feedback that's related to the growth, that would also be helpful for us to see. We know that a lot of the growth is coming from China, which obviously at this point in time has, there are some things that we just want to be watching for and making sure that we're doing a good job consistently across all of the different regions where the standard is being adopted. And so I think some of those, the social components of the standard, the environmental and the chemical, those are things that are not necessarily within Textile Exchange's core strengths. And so that's really where, especially because of the adoption level, the partnerships that we build with organizations in those areas is going to be even more important and relevant for us. So I think that's it. And I'm happy to answer any questions about really anything to do with standards. If there's anything that folks want to touch on, just let me know. And I did drop the link to the revision page for the content claim standard. So you should be able to download a version of that document there.
Easily, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Other questions or comments for Ashley? All right, guys. Well, as usual, you know where to contact Ashley. If you do have a question, go forward. We can always find her. So Ashley, thank you very much for your time today.
Yeah, thanks, Elaine. Thanks, everybody.
Great. All right, so we're gonna touch base on the rPET challenge. As we discussed last month, we're challenging the apparel industry to commit to bringing the percent of rPET from 14 to 45%, 17.1 million metric tons by 2025. So as of today, we have 40 signatories for the challenge. So we encourage anyone who hasn't signed up yet to please sign up. Next page. As part of that, if you sign up before March 31st, then you will be included in the press release that will be joint between FICCA and Textile Exchange. So urgent to get in there if you want to be part of that press release. It's planned for April 8th or April 13th. There is a meeting and discussion going on with the UN on Friday in order to finalize that and additional joint communications on the subject. We have announced on social media and the hub, not just February 16th, but I saw one posted last week as well. So we're continuing to reach out to the community through social media. And we sent targeted emails to the RPET Roundtable members on March 10th. So as our marketing plans continue to evolve, we'll continue to keep you updated. Just as a reference, in 2000s, the challenge that we had in 2017, we had 59 brands support that challenge. So clearly we still have a lot of opportunity in which to sign up. Next slide. Any questions about the RPET challenge, guys? Okay, we're going to briefly touch base on the RPET terms of reference. Each roundtable has developed terms of reference in order to clarify their goals and create a common structure so that we can track progress. So the vision for the RPET group is to eliminate the use of virgin PET. Bold statement, but that is ultimately the goal. Purpose is to support the textile exchange sustainability vision, the Climate Plus strategy, to identify barriers to growth, and to take collective action that result in meaningful impacts. We add value as a global multi-stakeholder group that comes together and increases the adoption of recycled polyester. Next slide. So the objectives here, obviously, achieve the TE Climate Plus strategy of 45% reduced CO2 emissions by 2030, replace the use of virgin PET with RPET, create price parity in the same performance, quality, and sustainability profiles, increase RPET availability, and improve education. The scope of that connects different stakeholders of the RPET supply chain, facilitate cross-industry learning, identify barriers to growth, opportunities and challenges, support and incubate new ideas, catalyze collective action, and actively contribute towards the Climate Plus strategy. Next slide. So participation in the group obviously is voluntary. We request of members to have regular attendance, take notice of the non-disclosure, why can't I say that today, and confidentiality, and to support the RPET roundtables development and collective actions. Any questions about the terms of reference, guys? Okay, next slide. So this is the meeting schedule for 2021. Just call attention for you guys. We have rescheduled April 27th, June 22nd, and July 27th. Those are the new dates. And those were rescheduled because there were other conflicts that we thought would impact you guys' availability. So those invites have already been sent. You should already have them, and that should already have been moved on your calendar. Perna, anything else I missed?
No, I think you covered everything, Elaine.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
All right, guys, that's it for today. Any other comments or questions? All right. then thank you for your time today, and we will see you in April. Thanks, guys.
Thanks,
Thanks a
Elaine.
lot.
Bye,
Thank
everyone.
you so much. Goodbye.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.